Okay, I gotta spend a little bit of time with the S23 devices, and I gotta be real here, very little has changed this year, so I'm gonna do my best to keep this short and succinct. I'm gonna focus on three things that I thought were noteworthy. First, the shape. So on the S23 and S23 Plus, they've gotten rid of that back hump, and I thought that kind of curved hump on the back of last year's devices and the year before that, I thought that was a very iconic design that they'd hold on to for a while, but it's gone. The new S23, S23 Plus have a very flat and plain looking back. The S23 Ultra looks very similar on the back to the S22 Ultra, but the edges of the Ultra phone is slightly different. So the curve at the edge of the device starts closer to that edge. So there's just a slightly wider kind of flat panel on the front, but the overall shape and feel is largely the same. I do think that for pen users, you do have like a slightly larger kind of flat surface area on the top for using that pen. But yeah, the S23 lineup has some slight changes in shape. The other thing I want to talk about are the cameras. So the front-facing cameras on all three devices now use a 12 megapixel front-facing sensor. Now, last year's S22 and S22 Plus devices had a 10 megapixel sensor that's now been upgraded to that 12. But last year's Ultra device, this one here, had a 40 megapixel front-facing sensor that was binned down to a 10 megapixel file. This year's device is a 12 megapixel native sensor, so it's a larger file size, but I'm curious as to see how the image quality will have changed between the years, but I need to get more testing on the real unit. Now the back cameras on the S23 Ultra have a 200 megapixel sensor. That's right, 200 megapixel. I took some photos with it. They are very high resolution, that's for sure, but there is a pretty noticeable wait time when you hit that shutter. It's like I don't know, 1.5, 2 second wait while that thing processes the 200 megapixel shot. So I don't think it's something that people use regularly, but they do have an extremely high resolution camera on the back of the S23 Ultra this year. Now the last thing I want to talk about are the chips that are inside these phones. So all three of them use the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and from my testing on some Chinese phones, it is a pretty noticeable increase across the board. So CPU is a lot better, GPU seems to be a lot better, but the big thing for me is power consumption. The energy efficiency of Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is noticeably better than what we saw last year. So I would imagine on all three of these devices, especially because the lower models have bumped up battery, I would expect better battery life, like a noticeable bump in battery life compared to the S22 options last year. But that's it. I really think that those are the three things of value to take away from the announcement today. I would say, like I've mentioned this concept in previous videos, like the whole idea of an eco round, right? Like if you've ever played Valorant or Counter-Strike, there's this thing called an eco round where teams will purposely not spend money and just like not buy stuff so they can save their resources for the next round. And the purpose of it is to ensure a better next round. Like they don't really worry too much about the current round. They want to ensure a higher probability of succeeding in the future. And I feel like this year's devices are, it's an eco round. And it's not just Samsung. I think a lot of companies are doing this, but I feel like the lack of hardware progression is pretty obvious. But there you have it, the Samsung Galaxy S23 devices.